warn you, keep this end in view. With another in a...
Hello! Hello! Hi! London! Hi, Dad. There's a bloke keeps on saying London's calling, London's calling.
I don't know anybody by the name of London.
Listen, Patsy, I'm afraid it's a little late to run over as I promised.
Oh, Jimmy, I am disappointed. I've been longing to see you.
Dear, it is important.
Well, really, Jimmy, I don't think that's very nice. Calling up that pie-faced factory wench just when we were having so much fun. She doesn't mean a thing to you, and you know it. Oh, no, it's no use you're trying to prevent her from hearing me. She might as well know just right now that you're only playing around with her.
Hello, Patsy. Hello.
Are you getting through now? What did you say? Tom, are you there?
Jane, I love you. I really do. With all my heart.
What did you say?
Jane, I love you. I love you.
What did you say? He said he loves you.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to have you with us tonight because you're part of the story that we want to tell. The story of how Australians have been kept in touch for 100 years by telephone. And of course, the telephone has been a part of your lives and the lives of thousands of other telephonists, linemen, technicians, engineers, a whole host of people. And that's what we wanted to share with you tonight. And we'll do that with the help of some old film and some photographs and some of your stories. We begin in 1880, the year of the first telephone exchanges in Australia. The early days of telephony in Australia were very eventful, especially for the operators.
Any girl who started as an operator with the Central Exchange late last century was very glad to get the job. You see, if you were a woman in those days and wanted to work, there wasn't very much choice. You could be a schoolmistress if you had education, or go into service as a housemaid if you didn't. The only other job was with the PMG. And there were a lot of girls applying every day, and the supervisors knew it.
Number, please. 1647. Number, please. Number,
It was so rare in those days for middle-class women to be working. Most genteel ladies got married early and had a house to tend to. The PMG was very concerned to maintain the highest standards of respectability on the exchange, and the girls received a lot of instruction about this. In early training, they were taught how to breathe properly. It was thought that it would help with proper voice projection. Also, a lot of girls got so nervous on the board, they forgot to breathe, and some of them fainted.
Very well. You seem to have that. Now I want to explain the next part of our procedure. Every morning, you are to ring your subscribers to make sure that the line is clear.
Excuse me, some of the other girls told me that some of the subscribers don't like...
Departmental policy.
But what happens if they...
Departmental policy.
My mother always thought the girls were nervous because of the instructresses more than anything else. And some of the rules didn't seem to make sense, like having to ring all the subscribers every morning at 9 a.m. to see if the line was working. Everything had to be done by the book, and if you didn't, they docked your pay.
You. Repeat that last line by yourself.
Will call Exchange or number asked for, sir or madam?
Well, I do hope we're not going to have a nervous lady in our midst. Exchange or number asked for, engage.
In the early 1900s, Australia was a rural economy and the population was spread far and wide. The telephone, although still a novelty, assumed a special importance to people remote from one another.
What is that? I can't hear you. Hello? Hello?
The farmers had built their own lines, often many miles out from the town. They were fairly primitive lines, but generally the farmers managed to keep them working. However, if the instrument itself didn't work, that was a job for the telephone mechanic. The telephone mechanic was regarded very highly. He knew about electricity, and that was something any man could be proud of. In a small country town, the telephone mechanic became as important a man as the local vet.
Ed, will you fix this blasted phone for me? It's gone bung again.
What's wrong with it, Arch?
And so the farmer's lifeline to the community was being restored. He knew the contraption would work, and he could do the outside maintenance on it. But he didn't know how it worked.
Hello? Ed? Can you hear me? Yes. You come in loud and clear. Okay. See you later, thanks.
Well, when I started work as a telephone mechanic for the PMG just after the First World War, motor vehicles were hard to come by. And of course, I was one of the fellas that missed out. And for a while, I used to cart new phones in a wheelbarrow to wherever the job was. Telephones were starting to get really popular when people saw how they could be used, and we were very proud of our work. We used to take a lot of care to make things look right. We had to know our job thoroughly. When they trained you, they taught you from the basic principles, so you knew how and why things worked. So I suppose it was a bit of a hobby for us as well as a job that we got a kick out of. Often in the old days, we had to work out our own ways of fixing things up. The fellas on the exchange working on the new automatic system, well, they used to invent pretty ingenious ways to keep things going. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they used bits of chewing gum and string, but sometimes you used to wonder. I'd pity anyone who came in 20 years later and tried to work out what they'd done. Of course, the automatic telephone changed things a lot. It could handle so many calls, you see, so easily, and it was so different from some of the old exchanges that used to close down at nights and on Sundays. And people were relying on the phone more and more, especially where there was an emergency.
Are you hurt?
Well,
I'll ring the police.
Yes, Mr. Smith will have the patrol car down there straight away. Right, sir.
Alert him call some killer, senior bag snatching. An accident. Who?
Dead place?
Hello, hey, there's a fire in Western's paddock. It may be serious. I've sent all 3 trucks.
There's a fire at Ed's place. The fire brigade is on its way.
did you know Mary had a baby boy last night? Oh, really? Absolutely marvellous. He weighed 8.5 pounds. A boy. Oh, beauty. Oh, it's a boy. A
The trunk telephone system between towns in Australia became popular very quickly. Too popular for the amount of lines available, in fact. Even the telephonists had to share lines when they were setting up a trunk call. And one lovely telephonist earned from her workmates the Girl with a Golden Voice award. Apparently, she had such a ringing tone in her voice that she could be heard over all the other telephonists on the line, and she always got her subscribers through. By the 1930s, all the major cities were linked by trunk line, and the Sydney Telephone Exchange became one of the busiest places in Australia. It was to become even busier. For over 50 years, all contact with overseas had been by telegraph, and even the news from abroad came in by Morse. And some of that news was very important.
And he's armed on Bradman. Now I ask you, is he any good?
Remember how the early cricket broadcasts had to be recreated from messages that came in by Morse code?
Let us follow the course of a typical message as received in the Commission's Sydney studios only a minute after the actual happening on the test ground in England. This cable is taken down in duplicate and immediately amplified by cricket experts who fill in details regarding field placements on model cricket fields for the commentator, whom you can now see broadcasting his description from the amplified cable information. As the shot is made, the effects man, who has in front of him a copy of the cable message, drops the needle on an effects record, and listeners hear the applause of the crowd as the shot reaches the boundary. And now, let us listen in.
Ames throws the ball back to Farnes. Farnes turns, runs in, volley to Bradman. This ball well pitched, Bradman moves forward, drives. Cotton at cover tries to cut it off, but is beaten by the pace of the ball, and it races away for another four.
Back in 1930, Prime Minister Scullin had made history when he spoke to the Prime Minister of Great Britain by radio telephone. Within a few short years, it was possible to speak to a number of countries, and the international switchboard was buzzing. Even though most people had become used to the idea of trunk line calls, this new concept of being able to talk to people across continents was quite extraordinary.
Hello! Hello! Here, give it to me. What's the game, eh?
This is John. John Manners. Speaking from London.
You're joking.
On land, sea and air, the armed forces depended on communications, and the post office played a major role in training and supplying technicians and equipment to all services. But the needs and destruction of war strained the services almost to breaking point.
In 1942, the trunk line service still hadn't gone through to Darwin. Money was scarce during the war. The telegraph line was being put up alongside the old telegraph line, and by February it had got as far as Alice Springs. One morning, Tillman and Alice saw that the telegraph line had broken down and that the break seemed to be close to the Darwin end. Of course, nobody had any idea what had happened.
Hey, that's a bit strange.
Must be a message coming through from Darwin, eh?
Better get the sounder up.
Yeah.
It must have been one of the most important messages ever to come down the line when they bombed Darwin.
Hello, sir. We just got a message through from Darwin. It reads, we've just had...
Immediately, they rang their engineer. The engineer told her to hang on while he phoned PMG headquarters in Melbourne. The engineer spoke to the Deputy Director General, and he in turn rang the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's instructions were relayed down the line. The message had to be destroyed.
Yes, sir. He says I've got to destroy it.
Destroy it? What do they want to do that for?
It was 3 more days before the news was released to the Australian public.
After 6 years of war, there was a lot to be done. As the men and women returned and found new jobs, business picked up again and social life was rekindled, needs became demands on both the postal and telecommunication services.
The line is always engaged.
We can't get prompt service.
Country towns need more lines.
What about the city?
To meet the situation, the PMG authorities announced plans to spend £42 million on new and improved services. New constructions began. Buildings of all sizes shot up. Telephone exchanges, post offices, training centres. New schemes for training ever-increasing numbers of tradesmen, technicians and linemen were developed. New factories were set up to make cables, switchgear and telephones. Up until now, almost all the equipment had been imported. Services expanded right across the country. The old telephone lines gave way to cables, which were now buried underground. This protected them from natural disasters like fires and floods, and keeping in touch was becoming more reliable.
Like the inside of the line. How can the phone be working?
Christ knows. Can you send us down some penicillin and bandages?
Yeah? Where to?
Town Hall. Other end of the main street, half a mile down.
All right. Who's this?
What do you mean, who's this? This is the Mayor of Maitland, that's who. My worship, the Mayor.
I know.
Life as a telephonist in the 50s was somewhat different to the early days. Women were much freer by the 50s. Not as free as they are now, of course, but we felt a lot more independent. Relationships with supervisors were a lot nicer. And the girls were able to make suggestions that made things easier. They were pretty cluey girls. They knew when it was going to be a busy day because they used to read the stock reports in the newspaper. None of us enjoyed those busy days because there weren't enough lines. When it got really busy, we had to put a time limit on calls, and that didn't impress the subscribers.
Well, we'll expect delivery of the sheep next week at the latest. Right, George, she'll be right.
Finish, please. I must disconnect you now.
Well, goodbye. Right, George.
It wasn't an easy job.
In the 60s, the big new trunk systems began to appear across Australia. More and more automatic telephone exchanges were installed in country areas. But there were still many places where people had their problems.
Why the delay? We have all our lines are busy. Look, this call is urgent. If I can't get through to Adelaide in 10 minutes, my Adelaide office is going to be closed. All our lines are busy. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. Well, thank you. Oh.
What happened about the shoulders?
I just can't get through, Mario. Rotten telephone.
The solution to these problems was a newer technology, which enabled people to dial their own trunk calls, STD.
Someone's waiting for you to say hello. Someone's waiting to hear your voice again. Somebody who you've just got to get a message to. You can really make their day. Someone needs to hear your voice today.
Hello, Jan, darling. How are you?
The telephone had become a way of life. People were ringing more and over longer distances. The new electronic exchanges with their computer controls and printed circuit boards could handle thousands and thousands of calls at once. And this gave people international subscriber dialing. There'll always be a demand for new services, and so the planning and research must go on. Giving a good telephone service requires the work of many people in many disciplines.
I wonder if I was starting out again, whether my career with the telephone would be the same. I think I'd like to be one of those women involved in research. They're coming up with all sorts of new ideas. I've been reading about them. Some of the things being done today are really fantastic. They use strands of glass and they use laser beams and they carry hundreds and thousands of telephone calls. Mr. Alexander Graham Bell probably started all this when he predicted these things. But I wonder what he'd think if he saw what was going on today.
Well, that was the first 100 years. What of the next? Anybody like to make a guess? I don't think any of us really know. There's only one thing of which I'm certain, and that is there will always be people like you who will be helping the others to keep in touch.